encuentran conectadas.
Good morning to
En
each and
este
every single
momento,
one of you.
bienvenidos, bienvenidas al webinar
So,
de
welcome to the
prevención de los
webinar
daños
for
del alcohol en
prevention
el
of
marco de la
alcohol damages within
iniciativa
the
SAFE.
framework of the
En este
SAFER
webinar
initiative.
vamos a
In
estar
today's webinar,
desarrollando
we will be
diferentes
developing
contenidos
different
y
contents
tenemos el objetivo de poder
of
incentivar la
trying
iniciativa
to
SAFER para que los países
incentivize the
avancen
SAFER
en la
initiative for
implementación de
countries to move forward
políticas y
on the
acciones costo
implementation
efectivas
of
para la prevención de los daños
cost-effective
del alcohol.
action policies.
Nuevamente, bienvenidas y
Again,
bienvenidos a este
welcome.
espacio. Les pedimos a
Welcome
cada
everyone
uno y
to
cada
this
uno de
space.
ustedes
We would like
disculpas
to
por
ask
los
each
minutos que
and
nos
every
tomó
single one of you
iniciar
apologies
teniendo
for the minutes
algunos
it took
inconvenientes
us to
técnicos,
get
pero
started. We were having some technical
ya estamos
difficulties, but
acá
what's important is
conectadas,
that we are
conectados.
now all
Les invitamos a que puedan
connected here.
compartir el
And we
enlace de la
invite all of you
discusión
to
a otras
be
personas en
sharing
sus
with us
países
in
porque
this
de
link
seguro
with people
este
in
espacio de
different
90
countries
minutos
because this
va a
90-minute
ser
space, I am
de
more than
grandes
certain, will be
aprendizajes.
of great learnings.
Antes de iniciar, quiero
Before
darle
getting
la palabra y la
started, I would
bienvenida
like to
al
give the
doctor
floor
Renato
to
Oliveira,
Mr. Renato
jefe de la
Oliveira,
Unidad de
a
Salud
Chief
Mental y
of Mental
Prevención de
Health
Alcohol
and
y Sustancias
Prevention of
Psicoactivas de la
Alcohol Unit
Organización
for the
Panamericana
Pan
de la Salud.
American
Bienvenido.
Organization. Welcome,
Muchísimas
Renato.
gracias, Leo.
Thank you so much,
Feliz de estar
Leo.
acá con
It is a
ustedes.
pleasure to be
Quiero
here
darles
with
la
all of you.
bienvenida
I
a
would
este
like to
importante evento
welcome
virtual,
everyone to this
donde,
important
como
virtual
decía
event
Leo, se
where, as
abordarán
Leo
los temas
said,
más
we will be
apremiantes para
agreeing
su
on some of the
gobierno,
most
la prevención de
concerning
los daños relacionados
points
con el alcohol.
for
Este
you.
tema
So
no
this
solo
topic is
afecta a
not
quienes
only something
consumen
that's
bebidas
affecting to those
alcohólicas,
who consume
sino que
alcoholic
también tiene
beverages,
profundas
but it also
implicaciones
has
para
deep
la calidad de vida,
implications for the
la
life
economía,
quality,
la
the
equidad,
economics,
salud y el desarrollo
equity,
sostenible
health,
de
and
nuestras
sustainable
sociedades.
development of our
El alcohol
societies.
es responsable de una carga
Alcohol is
significativa de
responsible for an
enfermedades,
important
mortalidad
load
y
of
daños
diseases,
sociales a nivel
mortality,
mundial.
and
Su consumo
social damages at a social level.
posiblemente
Its
3
consumption
millones de
contributes with
muertes
around 3
anuales,
million deaths per
impactando en el
year,
desarrollo de
having an
enfermedades como el
impact on the
cáncer,
development
los
of
trastornos
diseases such as
cardiovasculares,
cancer,
degeneración
cardiovascular
mental y
diseases, mental
lesiones
health
causadas por
problem,
accidentes y violencia.
as well as
Nuestra
other
región de Latinoamérica,
violence-related
este
accidents.
impacto es alarmante. Más de
This is very alarming
285.000
data. Over
muertes anuales están
185,000 deaths
relacionadas
a
con la
year are
consumo de
related
alcohol,
to
con
alcohol
costos
consumption,
incalculables
with
en vidas humanas
unmeasurable
y años
amounts
de
in
salud.
human life and
A pesar
lost
de la
healthy
magnitud del
years of
problema,
life.
el impacto
Despite
a
the magnitude of the
ciertas
problem, the
extremas
impact
vidas
of
fue
alcohol is in
reducido.
great measure
La
to
Organización Mundial de la
prevent.
Salud
The
asegura
World
que
Health Organization has been
no
very clear in
existe
its
un nivel
positioning.
seguro
There is
de
no
consumo de alcohol.
safe level of
La
alcohol
experiencia del
consumption.
consumo conlleva
Any
riesgos,
level of
desde la
consumption
dependencia hasta el
presents risk,
agravamiento de riesgos
from
de cáncer y
dependency,
lesiones.
the risk
Esta
of cancer, and
postura
injuries.
refuerza la
This
necesidad de
positioning
un cambio de
reinforces the
paradigma.
need of a
La
change of
prevención no debe
paradigm.
centrarse
Prevention should
únicamente
not
en la
focus
prevención,
only on
sino en
the
reducir el consumo de
deadly
alcohol
use, but on
en toda la
reducing the
población.
use of alcohol in the
Desde
entire
la aprobación de la
population.
Estrategia Mundial de la
From the
Erradicación del
approval of
cáncer,
the
hemos avanzado en el diseño de estrategias
agenda, we have moved
integrales para
forward in the
enfrentar el
holistic
cáncer.
design
En
policies for facing this
2019,
challenge. In
esta responsabilidad
2019,
fue
the World
actualizada
Action Plan
para
was
alinearse con los
updated to
objetivos del
be
desarrollo
aligned with the
sostenible,
goals for Sustainable
reconociendo que
Development
reducir
Goals,
el consumo de alcohol
recognizing that
es
reducing the consumption
fundamental
of
para
alcohol is
alcanzar metas
essential
como la
in
reducción de
order to
muertes por
reach goals
accidentes de
such
tráfico,
as
violencia y
reducing
enfermedades
deaths by
profesionales.
accidents, traffic, violence, and
Una
others.
iniciativa clave es
A
la
key
estrategia
initiative would
SAFE,
be the
que identifica
SAFER
las
strategy,
intervenciones
which
más
identifies the
costo-efectivas
most
para
cost
reducir los
effective
beneficios del
interventions in order to
alcohol.
reduce the damages caused by
SAFER no
alcohol.
solo ofrece
SAFER
herramientas
doesn't
prácticas
only
para los
offer
Estados
practical
miembros,
tools for
sino que
member
también
states,
fortalece la
but it
implementación de
also
estrategias
strengthens the
globales que
implementation of
abordan
global
esta
strategies that
problemática de
will
manera
give their input
integral.
to this problematic in a
Hoy nos
holistic
reunimos
way.
acá en este
Today, we
escenario
meet
con el
here
propósito de
with the
reconocer el
purpose of
potencial de la
recognizing
iniciativa
the
SAFER
potential
en la
of the
prevención de los
SAFER
daños del alcohol,
initiative in
así
preventing
como
damages caused
reconocer
by alcohol,
casos de
as well as
éxito real
recognizing
en esta
success
naturaleza
cases
SAFER.
for the implementation of
Me
this
complace contar
strategy.
con su
We're
participación
very
aquí en
happy
este
to
espacio
have
de
the
diálogo y
participation in this
reflexión.
dialogues
Juntos
and
podemos
space for
aprobar nuestra
reflection
estrategia
because
nacional
together
en
we
la
can provide
prevención de
policies that
daños
will
del
allow
alcohol.
us to move forward in prevention the
Bienvenidos
damages
y toda
caused by
clase
alcohol.
participen.
Welcome everyone,
Muchas
and now I give
gracias,
you the floor.
Renato.
Thank you so
Es
much,
muy
Renato.
importante
It's very
esta
important
reflexión
to have this reflection that you're making in order to introduce us to this webinar talking about the positioning from the Pan American Health Organization, as well as the importance of moving forward in preventing the damages caused by alcohol. You were mentioning the global strategy as well as the safer strategy, and I believe it is very important for all of us to recognize what we're talking about when we talk about the safer initiative. In order for that, we have invited Dr. Doug Reeve from the World Health Organization so that he can give us his first-hand experience and understand what the Safer Initiative refers to in this global plan, and basically what has incentivized it as well. Dr. Reeve is part of the Department of Mental Health and Use of Psychocognitive Substances in the World Health Organization and is joining us today, afternoon for him. So thank you so much, Doctor, for having joined us and for accompanying us. Thank you. It is a real pleasure for me to be here. So just 1 second while I put my presentation. I hope that you can see my screen. Yes, we can see it. Just give us 1 second. I'm going to give you some information to the audience, which is that the webinar has interpretation available in Spanish, English, and Portuguese for everyone. Please, I invite you to select the language of your presence. This presentation will be given in English. Now, Dr. Duck, please go ahead. We can see your presentation now. Thank you.
Good morning, buenos dias, buen dia. It is a great honor for me to be presenting to this webinar in PAHO for the Global Safer Initiative and how that can be implemented in the Pan American Health Organization and its member states. I will give a quick overview of the global situation when it comes to alcohol-related harm and interventions, and especially focusing on the recently endorsed Global Alcohol Action Plan and the Safer Package and the Safer Interventions. Due to time, I will shorten the presentation and I will flip some of the slides quickly. They are all the information is available, most of it in the Global Status Report on Alcohol and Health, which was released in June this year and is available on our web pages. So sorry that I will then quickly pass some of the slides. I think we need to start with the basics when it comes to alcohol, to understand the harms and understand how we can counter and reduce those harms. And alcohol and ethanol is a psychoactive substance. It has considerable toxic effects. It has intoxicating effects, which creates harm, and it has an addiction pharmacology and a dependence propensities, which also creates additional harms through its loss of self-control from the dependent users. So we have estimated that alcohol is causally linked to almost 200 codes in ICD-11 and 30 big disease groups. And only a few of them are causally related in a beneficial way. The vast amount is detrimental. And the numbers I'm presenting here today are net numbers, and that is important to keep in mind. They are numbers where the beneficial effects have been subtracted from the gross effects of harmful use of alcohol. And there are two ways and to understand where is the best entry point for public health, we need to have in mind the whole broad determinants around problems with substance use in general and alcohol specifically, but also focus on where is it public health has an intervention possibility, because we have many different determinants for alcohol-related harms, and some of them and many of them are outside of the sphere and competency of public health. Unfortunately, those are often used as arguments against installing those measures we know are effective. So that has become a strange rhetoric around this. We should acknowledge the broad determinants behind alcohol-related harm, but at the same time, we should be clear and focusing on this corner here where really public health related to alcohol can have an impact, and that is prevention, treatment, and harm reduction policies and programs, and looking at the availability and affordability of substances. And there are two ways of looking at the effect of alcohol. One is to look at how much alcohol is attributable to deaths and disorders. And here you see just a picture, an example of how important alcohol is in many different diseases: suicides, interpersonal violence, cancers, tuberculosis, etc., etc. Another way of looking at it is how alcohol-related burden is distributed inside the total alcohol burden. So that are two different ways of looking at it. Independent of which way you look at it, it's very clear that alcohol and harmful use of alcohol is a considerable burden globally, and a lot of it is avoidable. And that is the topic for our seminar here today. If you sum everything up, you see that around 2.6 million people died in 2019. And disability life years lost around the same percentage, 4.6% of all global dailies. We know that 400 million people are living with an alcohol use disorder. We know also considerable gender and geographical differences, and over 50% of the alcohol attributable deaths occur before the age of 60. And there are considerable negative consequences for others than the drinker. I will now skip all the data that I was planning to present. They are available on our webpage. And we'll go to what are the main topic for this seminar, and that are what are the effective interventions we can put in place. We have considerable knowledge about the problem. We have considerable knowledge about the solutions. And we have important decisions at the global arena. First and foremost, the global strategy to reduce the harmful use of alcohol in 2010, which was endorsed by all member states of WHO, 194 member states. We have the global global action plan on NCDs, which highlights alcohol as one of the 5 key risk factors for non-communicable diseases. And we have the decisions in the United Nations that alcohol and reducing alcohol-related harm is an important target to achieve sustainable development. And to bridge then from all these decisions into action, the Global Alcohol Action Plan was adopted again by all member states of WHO in 2022 to guide further how we could reduce this burden. And the safer technical package and the safer way of working is one way of operationalization of the actions and guide countries on how they best can reduce alcohol-related harms. The global strategy endorsed in 2010, an important milestone in global public health relations to alcohol. The global strategy clearly said that harmful use of alcohol is broad and encompasses the drinking that causes detrimental health and social consequences, not only for the drinker, but also for the people around the drinker and society at large, as well as the patterns of drinking that are associated with increased risks of adverse health outcomes. So we need to have this broad picture that Dr. Renato referred to, that it cannot only work with the dependent and the heavy end of the consumption. And as such, the global strategy says that we have to work on the level of alcohol consumption, the patterns of alcohol consumption, the context of alcohol consumption, and the wider social determinants of health. We should also have special attention to people other than the drinker and populations at particular risks. And the global strategy outlined 10 areas broadly where the countries could work on, without giving any specific guidance what was the most important area to work on. We learned a lot of lessons from the global strategy implementation. First and foremost, that it's clearly a lack of a global consensus on a normative law, and also there were also lacking specific guidance and targets. And we see a lot of weak political will. There's a conflicting priorities. We saw the need for more intersectoral collaboration. We witnessed policy incoherence inside governments between different areas of the government. Also limited technical capacity and resources and funding, especially in low and middle-income countries, but also in developed countries. Even though there's a lot of competency and capacity out there, we see that there is also a lot of limitations. Inadequate monitoring systems. It's easy for politicians to to ask for more data when there's little will, and then we need more data to secure a political will. And in this area there is weak political will, and that as such improving the monitoring is an important part of the strategy, and get better data. Even though we have a lot of data, a lot of knowledge, that shouldn't stop us, but we need to improve. We saw the cultural and contextual complexities around alcohol. We see how the global industry, it's getting concentrated and very instrumental in all countries. In fact, now the global big companies are present in most of the world. And again, then commercial influence on policy making, and new challenges which have emerged the last 10 years with digital marketing and delivery platforms. All this led to the need for a global action plan to guide countries and member states further. I will not go into detail about the action plan. I just want to highlight that there are two really new things with the action plan compared to the global strategy. And that is first and foremost that it clearly had the focus on that you need to work first and foremost with the high impact strategies and interventions, those that we know are working. It does not mean that you should not be doing other things and accumulating evidence about other things, but it should not be a scapegoat for not implementing effective and cost-effective strategies. The other thing that was new was that we came with specific guidance now for member states, for WHO Secretariat, major partners in the UN system, civil society and professional associations on what they could do further. And with the economic operators, that was new, very controversial, but most of the proposed measures for the economic operators is what they should refrain from. And as such can create an operational measure about how you should deal with the alcohol industry at the national level. But the final thing was that it also set clear targets now for global action, what we would like to achieve. Here's just one example that by 2030, we should at least have reduced alcohol consumption and harmful use of alcohol with 20%, and 70% of countries should have introduced and enacted and maintained high impact interventions. So this was basically the new things in the action plan compared to the global strategy. And as such, this was crystallized into what we call the safer high impact interventions and the safer technical package and the safer initiative, which are focusing on the most cost-effective interventions to strengthen restrictions on alcohol availability, to advance and enforce drink driving countermeasures, to facilitate access to screening, brief intervention and treatment, to enforce bans and comprehensive restrictions on advertising, sponsorship and promotion, and to raise prices on alcohol through excise taxes and pricing policies. And I will not go into detail about each of these interventions. You can read it, and we have a considerable documentation on how you could work at the country level with implementing these 5 strategies. And I really encourage you to go visiting our webpage, download the Global Alcohol Action Plan, the Safer Technical Package, and all technical documents that we have produced that support the implementation of these 5 areas in your countries. So when we look at how we then want to implement SAFER, we can say that we have several different operational modalities and a key strategic focus. First of all, SAFER is an acronym for the most cost-effective interventions to reduce alcohol-related harms. And SAFER is then a technical package and guidance that outlines ways in which countries can implement the 5 SAFER interventions. In addition, we have a global SAFER initiative where WHO have partnered with the United Nations Interagency Task Force on NCDs, the UNDP, and civil society organizations to advocate for and facilitate implementation of SAFER interventions at country level. But at the same time, there are many different entities that can support the implementation of SAFER and the SAFER technical package at the national level. And the strategies are that we have to implement through political commitment and multi-sectoral collaboration, financing, etc., etc. We have, of course, to monitor, but what we have really realized in the implementation is that we need to secure that the evidence-based and robust policy-making process to avoid unnecessary diversion, and it needs to be protected from policy-making from undue interference. and we have to create much better strategies for how to achieve that. So here's just one example. You can have a light implementation, you can have a heavy implementation, but there are some stepping stones that you should be following to be able to secure good implementation. And first and foremost, there's a local ownership. Safer and implementation of the Global Alcohol Action Plan has to be owned by the countries. It cannot be done because there's someone else tells you that you have to do it. It has really to be owned and guided and steered by the national level. You need to know what is the context and the situation in your country. You could have missions and help from other international level to help you in this process. You need to prioritize the safer interventions. It might be difficult to implement all 5 of them immediately, so you might need to create a roadmap, and you need to align your context and your situation with global evidence and global context. And then you need to have a very concerted implementation phase, have some advocacy instruments like an alcohol control investment case, and you need to have a safer monitoring system, or at least some kind of indicators to measure success. And this can be then done in several different ways, in a heavy model or in a light model. The most important thing is at it started, there's a local ownership of it, and you use the safer concept of implementing the most cost-effective interventions. If you don't do that, it's difficult to call it a safer implementation. You can call it something else, but not safer, if you're not wanting to implement the most cost-effective interventions. So the way forward after our experience now with having implemented SAFER in a global alcohol action plan, we see how much is needed action is at all levels. Of course, first and foremost at the individual level. We need all of us to do an introspection of what kind of role we want alcohol to play in our life, in the life around us, and in the greater society. At the local level, that is the face of alcohol-related harms. We need to empower communities to act and they tailor the intervention to local realities. And they could also amplify the community voice to influence national action. And I was so fortunate to kick off a webinar in Ireland earlier this week, but they now are trying to localize SAFER into local communities because the communities has a lot of competency on availability, even on marketing, on treatment and brief intervention, and also on road safety, perhaps not on pricing. So there's a lot local communities could do, even though perhaps there are no action at the national level. And we are also trying this localization in a couple of countries where we are implementing SAFER now, in Uganda and Nepal. The national level is really the engine of change. And the implementation and enforce strong alcohol policies, secure funding, champion public health, and engage with local, regional, and global stakeholders. That is really the central focal point in the way that we are set up and how legislative systems and national health systems are working. And at the regional level, WHO have 6 regional offices, and they are really instrumental in building bridges and fostering collaboration. PAHO is one of these. Harmonize policies upwards, not downwards, that we all could run down to liberalization. But how can we harmonize policies upwards? So it's easier to for example, regulate marketing, because often cross-border marketing or cross-border sales of alcohol is big challenges around the world. We need to share lessons learned and create regional networks to strengthen collective actions. And at the global level, we need to lead the change and much better be in charge of being the global health voice on alcohol. We need to provide more robust evidence, strengthen global norms, catalyze bold actions, and unite countries in international collaboration. And at all the levels, it's very much needed to prioritize resource mobilization, monitoring, protection from conflict of interests, foster relentless advocacy, and build impactful partnerships to reduce alcohol-related harm. Because alcohol is a tricky liquid. It is ingrained in many cultures. There are many vested interests at the individual level, at the community level, at the corporate level, and even at the global institutional level. So really it needs bold champions, bold actions, and a lot of courage to reduce alcohol-related harm globally. And I'm really happy that now we are kicking off a webinar series in PAHO on SAFER, and hopefully this is the beginning. There has been a lot of action in the past with SAFER in your region, and perhaps this is now a new way of igniting that previous action and really starting working concertedly at the national level. So thank you very much for your attention and good luck with the webinars series. Over to you, Leo.
Muchas gracias, Dak, por esta valiosa
Thank you very
presentación.
much, Dak, for
Ha
this
sido, como ya lo
presentation.
mencionabas, un reto
Just like you
poder
said, it has been a
sintetizar
challenge to be able
todo,
to
digamos, ese marco de SAFER en estos
summarize
minutos, pero
that
creo que
framework of SAFER in a few minutes,
nos
but
lleva hacia
I
una
think
reflexión
that
importante
you
de
do
estas
bring us to
acciones y
an important
expectativas y
reflection on
también
these
de la
effective actions
importancia de
and
avanzar
also
en los
on the
diferentes
importance
países,
of advancing
reconociendo
in different
claramente estas
countries,
citas
recognizing
exitosas,
clearly
casos
strategies
exitosos
and
y
successful
adicionalmente la
cases, and
importancia de
additionally,
articularse
the
desde los
importance of
diferentes sectores
articulating
y
from the
claramente
different
invitando a los
sectors and
países para que
clearly
sean ellos
inviting the
quienes se
countries for
apropien
them to
de
be the
SAFER
ones who make
para facilitar
ownership
su
of SAFER
implementación.
to
Y
facilitate
creo
their
que esto
implementation.
que tú mencionas nos
And
da pie
I
para la
think that this
siguiente
that you
parte del
mentioned
webinar,
gives
y es,
us
dada la
a step to the
importancia de
next part of the
reconocer
webinar,
pues ese
which
progreso
is the
que
importance
tienen
of
los países en la
recognizing
implementación del
the
SAFER, esas acciones que se
country's
pueden
importance
desarrollar,
in
no
implementing
solo pues
SAFER,
como esos
those strategies
retos
that can
que se
develop
tienen,
many times through the
y es por ello
challenges.
que hemos
And that is why
generado o hemos diseñado un
we
panel
have
en este
generated
webinar
or
que va a
designed a
estar
panel in
liderado por el
this
doctor
webinar
Juan Taylor
that
de la
Dr. Juan
Organización
Taylor
Mundial de la
of
Salud,
the
jefe de la unidad MENA-SACOM, y en
World
donde estarán
Organized Health
participando también
Organization
Pablo Norambuena del Departamento de
leads,
Salud
and also
Mental
Paula
y División de
Rambena
Prevención y
from the
Control de
Department
Enfermedades
of
del Ministerio de
Disease
Salud de
Control and
Chile,
Prevention and
Agustina
Mental
Luque,
Health from the
coordinadora de
Ministry of
proyectos y
Chile,
desarrollo institucional
also the
de CLAS,
coordinator of projects and
Alejandro Marín
institutional
de la
class,
Fundación
Alejandro
ANASH y
Marin
líderes de la
of Anash
iniciativa
Foundation
Reset
of the
en
Reset
Colombia,
Initiative
en donde
in
precisamente
Colombia,
se va a
where
estar dialogando
precisely
sobre esos
we're going to
avances
be
nacionales, sobre esos retos
dialoguing
y
about
sobre
these national
esos factores que
advances,
facilitan la
those challenges,
implementación
and
de
those factors
SAFER.
that facilitate the
Entonces,
implementation
siendo
of
más, le doy la
SAFER.
palabra al doctor
So
Cantela,
I
quien
pass the
estará
floor to
liderando
Dr.
este
Cantela,
importante
who's
panel.
going to be
Doctor
leading this
Juan,
important
bienvenido
panel.
y muchas
Dr.
gracias
Juan,
por la
welcome, and thank
participación.
you very much for being here.
Muchas gracias. Buenas
Thank you very
tardes
much,
a
and
todas
good
y todos.
evening to
Es un
everybody.
gusto
It's a
poder
pleasure to
moderar este
be
panel
able to
que tiene
moderate this
exponentes muy
panel. It
importantes
has very
a los cuales
important
invito también a poner en
issues and
cámara por
topics that
si
I
vamos
invite you
Saúl,
also to put
Silvia
on your
Agustina,
camera if you
Pablo
haven't
en
done it
todo
before.
caso
We have
también
Agustina, Pablo
su persona.
also,
Mientras
please.
preparamos
And while we prepare
las logísticas del
the
panel,
logistics of
¿por
this
qué no nos
panel,
dicen en el
why
chat,
don't you
no
let
en
us
el
know
Q&A,
in the
sino
chat,
en
not
el
in
chat
Q&A,
simplemente de
just
qué
in the chat,
países se han
which
conectado, qué países
countries are
representan?
you connecting to this meeting
Eso
from?
nos va a ayudar
Which
también a
countries do you
entender un
represent?
poco
This is also going to help
algunas de
us
las
to
preguntas
understand a bit
y darle espacio
some
también
of the
para
questions
una
and give us
conversación.
space to have a conversation.
Eh, Inicialmente teníamos un
Initially,
cambio en el programa.
we had a change
Alejandro
here in the
Marín va a
program.
tomar
Alejandro
el
Marin
lugar de una
is
colega
going
de
to take the
Colombia.
place of
Le
a
agradezco
colleague
mucho,
from
Alejandro, la
Colombia. I
posibilidad de que
appreciate very
estés aquí
much,
con
Alejandro, the
nosotros para
possibility
contarnos
of
un
you being
poco
here with us to be able to
la
talk a
historia
bit about the
de las
story
intervenciones
of
SAFER
the safer
en
interventions
Colombia. La
in Colombia.
intención del panel
The
era
intention
compartir
of
con
the
ustedes
panel was to share
muchos de
with
los
you
desafíos de
many
ir
of the
directamente
challenges of
a
going
entender
directly
qué es lo
to
que sucede a nivel
understanding what is
nacional.
happening
Y
at a
para eso les
national
voy a
level.
dar la palabra
And for that, I'm
inicialmente
going to pass the
al
word
doctor Pablo
initially to
Norambuena,
Dr.
que como
Pablo
fue
Norambuena,
introducido es del Ministerio
as he
de
was
Salud
introduced from
de
the Health
Chile.
Ministry of Chile.
Pablo, yo creo que tú
Pablo,
tienes
I
algunas
think
láminas
you
para
have
compartir con
some slides
nosotros.
to share with
Si
us.
te dejamos compartir
And
mientras tanto,
if we can allow
estamos
you to
atentos.
share,
Palabra
we
ahora
will be
para
listening
ti
right
entonces.
now.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias
Okay,
por la
thank you very
invitación
much
a
for
la
the
Organización Panamericana de
invitation.
la Salud, al doctor Oliveira, doctor García.
This is Pablo
Un gusto
Nideiro,
escuchar al doctor Repke
and I'm happy
y
to
un
hear Dr.
gusto esta
Pekpin,
moderación
and I'm
con
happy to
estos
be
temas,
able
¿no?
to
Yo
moderate
soy
with
Pablo
Dr. Tello.
Norambuena, soy de
I'm
Chile,
Pablo Arambuena
trabajo en el
from
Ministerio de
Chile.
Salud de Chile,
I
en la
work in
gerencia
the
de
Health
agencia
Ministry
estatal
of
de la Agencia
Chile
de Salud.
at a
Y desde la
national level
perspectiva,
in
desde
the
la,
Agency of
desde
Health,
a
And this is a
contarle alguna de
perspective
nuestra
from which I'm
experiencia,
going to be talking
quizás
about
las más relevantes
our
que nos
experience, maybe
aporta
the most
esta
relevant for
reunión.
our purpose in this meeting.
Bueno, la invitación entonces a
So this
enmarcarnos dentro de
invitation
SAFER,
is to
y
be
nosotros
able
hemos desde hace varios
to,
años considerado
inside
los marcos
Safer,
estratégicos que la
since many
Organización
years ago,
Mundial de la
consider
Salud
the
y Atención
strategic
Preventiva en Salud
framework that
proponen.
the
El doctor Redke lo
World
escribió en
Health
detalle, pero la
Organization
estrategia global
proposes,
de
and the
alcohol,
doctor
el
talked
plan de
about in
acción reciente
detail, which
SAFER, que es una
is
iniciativa
the
que permite
SAFER
lograr en este
initiative
tomo
to be
enmarcarnos en
able
los desarrollos de
to
manera muy clara y también
framework the
comunicarlo
development with alcohol in a clearer way than before,
a las agencias con las
and
cuales trabajamos,
also
a las
via the
fundaciones también.
agencies that we work
Y
with.
tenemos una estrategia
And
nacional sobre
we
alcohol
have a
desde el
national
2010,
strategy with alcohol since
también
2010.
una estrategia nacional de salud
Also, a
reciente,
national
2020
strategy
al
for health that
2030,
recently
que incluye el consumo de
has
alcohol como
been
una de las
created
líneas.
until 2030
Además
that
de todo lo que
includes
señalaban
alcohol
antes
consumption
en
as
las
one of
presentaciones
the
previas,
important points. And as we've
el
seen
consumo
in
de alcohol
previous
tiene dos líneas en la
presentations,
estrategia
alcohol
de salud de
consumption has
Chile.
two lines
Una de ellas
in the
es de que las
strategy of health
personas
of
por
Chile.
consumo de alcohol
One has to
están en el
do
marco de los
with
trastornos de salud
the
mental, digamos, ¿no? Eso es lo que hacemos
diagnosis
cuando
of
hablamos de
mental
tratamiento, de
health
consumo
due to use
nocivo,
of
etcétera.
alcohol when we
Y
talk
tiene
about
otra línea que está en
treatment
el marco
and harmful use, and
de
another
factores de
line
riesgo, ¿no?
which
Y
has to
cuando
do
hablamos de
with
eso, estamos
risk
hablando del
factors. And
consumo de
when we
alcohol,
talk
¿no?
about that, we're
Queremos
talking
reducir el
about
consumo de
consumption.
alcohol para
We
reducir las
want to reduce
consecuencias
the consumption
socioeconómicas
of
que el
alcohol
consumo
so
de
we
alcohol
can
tiene,
reduce the
que son
consequences
mayores a
that the
mayor
consumption
cantidad,
of
pero que
alcohol
están
has,
presentes desde el
which
primer
are
descargue
greater
que
in
deberían
greater
desaparecer en
amounts,
el
but
último
you
año
realize
de la
this from the
pandemia.
first
Pero si nos enmarcamos en
drink.
SAFER, entonces
And
yo
if we
podría
talk about
decir que
safer, I
en
can
Chile tenemos
say
la suerte de tener
that
desarrollo
we
en
are
cada una de estas
lucky to
líneas
be able to
y no todo
develop
ello
in each one
satisfactorio
of
como
these lines,
quisiéramos,
and
pero
not
hay
all of
buena
them are
desarrollo.
satisfactory as
Podemos
we
ir en
would
la
like to,
misma
but
lógica
they are
del
part of the
acrónimo en ese
development,
caso.
and we can use the same logistic
Tenemos
if you'd
regulaciones
like.
de disponibilidad
We
de bebida
have
alcohólica en
regulations
Chile, el
available
consumo
of
prohibido a
alcoholic
menores de
drinks
18 años,
and consumption which is
un
prohibited
porcentaje
to
de lugares de venta de
minors
puntos de
younger
acceso
than
de
18
consumo de alcohol
years
que está
old,
definido por ley.
places that are fined to be
Tristemente
able
en
to
Chile las líneas
consume and
secretarias
sell
de venta
alcohol
de
by the
alcohol
law.
no son muy
Unfortunately,
restrictivos. La verdad
we are
que en
not
la
very
práctica en
restrictive in alcohol
todos los días
consumption
de la
in
semana se
Chile.
puede extender alcohol
Practically,
en
you
casi
can
todos los
drink
horarios.
alcohol every day of the week, practically at any time.
Pero claro, probablemente el
But
mayor
of
desafío
course,
que tenemos
probably
respecto a
the
la regulación de la
greatest challenge
disponibilidad de
that we
bebidas
have
alcohólicas tiene que ver
is
con
the
el
in the
cumplimiento de esas
availability of
normativas, ¿no?
alcoholic drink is the
Eh,
actual compliance
el cumplimiento de las
of
normativas de
those
consumo en
laws,
menores
the
de 18 años.
compliance of the regulations in
Recientemente se publicó una ley que acabo de
minors
recibir
younger
entonces
than
y me referiré a
18.
ella un
And
poco
they
más adelante
recently
cuando
published
hablemos
the
del
law, and
proyecto de
I'm
ley,
going to talk about it
que
later,
incorporó dentro de sus lineamientos la obligación de
that
tener
included
identificación, en nuestro caso el DNI,
the
digamos, en nuestro caso se llama
in the
cédula de
law
identidad,
the
a todas
obligation
las
of
personas que
showing your
consumen, que
ID
compren alcohol, todas las personas que
to
consumen
each
alcohol,
person that purchases
sin importar cómo
alcohol,
se vean, ¿no?
regardless of how they look.
La evidencia ha sido clara, ¿ya?
So the
Quisiera destacar
evidence
eso, ha
is
sido muy
clear.
clara en demostrar
It's been very clear in
que en
showing
la práctica, investigaciones, digamos,
that in
han
the
reportado que
practice, in
se vende
reality,
en
the
la práctica que
investigations have
los vendedores,
reported
digamos,
that
tienen dificultades para
the
identificar
sellers have
las edades de las
difficulty to
personas que
be able
compran.
to identify the ages of the
Hombres menores de
people that
18 años pueden
purchase.
comprar, pero sobre todo
Men that are
mujeres,
younger
¿ya?
than 18 can buy, but
El 50%
especially
de las mujeres de
women,
14 años puede comprar,
15% of women younger than
a
14
juicio de los
can
vendedores.
purchase alcohol.
Bueno, de manera que es
At
necesaria esta
least that
normativa, que
is
por
the
supuesto ha
judgment
provocado
of
algunas
the sellers
resistencias,
of alcohol.
pero la
So there
llevamos adelante.
must be some resistance, but
Respecto
this is the
de la
tendency.
consumo de alcohol en el
And when we
segundo
talk
acrónimo
about
de
the
A en este
alcohol
caso,
consumption,
en Chile
we're
tenemos
talking
también
about A
regulaciones a
now.
principios de
In
los
Chile, there
2000,
are
hubo reducciones
regulations at the beginning
importantes.
of the year
Una de
2000. There
ellas
were
es
important
la
regulations.
reducción
One
de
was
la concentración de alcohol
the
en la sangre,
reduction
el
of
Blood
the
Alcohol
alcohol
Concentration.
concentration
Hay
in blood,
estándares,
blood
digamos,
alcohol
internacionales, en
concentration. There
nuestro
are
caso 0,03.
international standards. In this case, it's
Y además, un par
0.003.
de años después, aumentan las
And a
sanciones
few years
por accidentes
later, there was an
graves,
increase in sanctions for
accidentes con participación del
severe
consumo de alcohol.
consequences due to accidents
Eso va en la línea de lo
that
correcto,
had
eso
to
va en
do
la
with
línea de las
alcohol
recomendaciones
consumption.
internacionales
So that is correct.
y
That is
permitió,
aligned with the
por cierto,
international
reducir
recommendation. And it
la
allowed,
mortalidad
by the
asociada a
way, to
accidentes de tránsito con
reduce
participación
mortality in
por consumo de alcohol de
accidents where
manera bastante
alcohol
rápida y de
consumption
manera bastante clara.
was involved in a clear way.
Si vamos a la F, probablemente ese
So
sea
if we
uno de
go
nuestros
to
mayores
F,
logros
probably this is one of our
y,
greatest
por cierto, una de las mayores
successes
colaboraciones que podríamos ofrecer con el
and
SAFER,
the greatest
si corresponde, ¿no?
partnerships that we can
usted lo
offer
valore
to other
así.
countries if it
Tiene que
corresponds
ser
and you
aceptación
value it
académica.
this
Es decir,
way. That
tenemos
has
un
to do
programa
with
nacional de
institutions.
screening en
We
candidaturas
have
laborales
national
desde el
screenings
2011, es
and
decir, hace ya
since
13 años, 14
2011,
años.
since 14
Tiene
years ago,
además de un lineamiento técnico, por
that
cierto,
has
que
a
no es ningún secreto,
technical
porque es lo que ustedes pueden
also
encontrar desde las recomendaciones de la OMS a principios de los 2000 en adelante. Tenemos un modelo técnico nacional, pero además tenemos un modelo administrativo. Esto es un programa, ¿no? Un programa que tiene metas, que tiene obligaciones para ser cumplida en la red de atención primaria de salud de Chile, que tiene un financiamiento que ha
that
logrado ser
has a
mantenido. En
financing
todo
that has
caso,
to be
es
maintained in
mucho
any
más
case,
barato, es mucho más
that
reducido que
is
todas las
much
relaciones
cheaper
sanitarias que
and much more
regularmente
reduced
hacemos en salud,
than all
porque
the
las intervenciones
regular
breves son
health
estrategias estructuradas muy simples,
institutions have structured in a
que
very
deben,
simple
desde la
way.
definición, digamos, ser
That since the
ofrecidas como
definition,
especialistas
we can say that
a
is
personas que
offered
no
by
buscan ayuda.
specialists
Estamos
and people
buscando
that are
no
not
personas
searching for help.
desesperadas,
We're searching
estamos
for
buscando
new
personas
people
cómodas
that
en
have new
convertir.
diagnose.
Y lo pueden hacer técnicos
And they
paramédicos. En
can
Chile
do
tenemos
this with
técnicos de salud
paramedic
no profesionales
that are
universitarios, entonces es
technicals.
una
They
carrera que
are
no es cara,
health
que es muy,
technicians,
muy
but they're
simple
not
de hacer,
professionals.
toma
It's
muy poco
something that
tiempo,
is
que no
not expensive.
interfiere
It's
con
very
las acciones
simple to
regulares
do.
de
It
la red
doesn't
de
take
salud,
too
en
long,
nuestra experiencia,
and it
y que
doesn't
hemos logrado
interfere with
mantener una
regular
productividad muy
health.
alta. La
So in our
pandemia impactó
experience,
durante la
this
pandemia,
has a very
hubo
high
mayor
impact.
de
For
personas
example,
con
before the
screening al
pandemic,
año
there were a
en un
million
país
people
con
that were
17 millones de
screened for the
personas.
disorder
Eso
a
es
year.
harto, ¿no?
That's a
Bastante.
high number.
Bueno, permítanme dejar la E para el final, porque con esto voy a
So
terminar. La
allow
nueva
me to
metodología
finish
para el
with
consumo de
E,
alcohol,
but in
nuestros
R, it's
impuestos son, en
alcohol
todo caso,
consumption
probablemente la estrategia
taxes.
más antigua
Our
en Chile
taxes are
para
probably the
abordar el tema del
most
alcohol, porque reporta beneficios para el
old
heraldo
strategy in Chile
estatal,
to
¿cierto?
be able to control
Hace muchas
alcohol
décadas que
consumption,
tenemos
and
impuestos.
it's a state
Actualmente los
law.
impuestos en Chile son
There
ad
are
valorem, es
taxes
decir, que
currently
cargan
in
sobre el
Chile
precio, ¿ya?
that are charged over the
Y son
price of the
distintos para
alcohol,
vinos y
and
cervezas
they
que
are
para el
different
licor,
for
¿ya? Son dos
wines
impuestos
and
diferentes que
beers
están
than to
previamente determinados.
spirits. There are two
Si
different
bien este es
taxes
un
that are
avance, ¿ya?
predetermined.
Hoy día
It is
sabemos
an
que no es
advancement, but we do
la
know
estructura más
currently
efectiva
that
de
it is
impuestos.
not the
La
most
estructura más
effective
efectiva de
structure
impuestos son
of
impuestos a la
taxing. The
cantidad de
most
alcohol
effective
en la
taxing
bebida alcohólica
is
y
regarding the
probablemente
amount
este
of
sea
alcohol
nuestro
inside the alcoholic
desafío
beverage.
mayor para
And
los próximos
probably
años,
this
¿no?
is the greatest
Hemos tomado
challenge for
también
us for the
safer
next
como
years.
marco orientador
We've also taken
y
safer
ese es nuestro desafío
as
probablemente para los próximos
the
años. Pero
framework that
déjenme
we're going
terminar
to
con
be
lo de la
working for
publicidad,
next
porque
year.
Chile no tenía
But
regulación de
also,
publicidad
Chile
alguna,
had not
ninguna, digamos,
regulation
hasta hace un
at
par de
all
años. Eso no
until a
obstante,
few
todo
years
eso, la
ago.
última vez que la OPS
So the last
mostró
time
o hizo
that
un análisis
the
global de la
we
publicidad
had
está publicado
a
en la página de la
global
OPS
analysis
para
from the
América Latina y
police
el Caribe, el
in the
50% de los países
OPS
no
page
tenía
for Latin
regulación.
America and the Caribbean,
El
50% of the
77% de los
countries were
países no
not
tenía
regulated.
regulación
They were not
placement, digamos, de
regulated
publicidad
in
en eventos
placement
juveniles.
of
Es decir,
marketing
en nuestra
in
región
juvenile
eso tiene un
events.
desafío muy grande y para
So
eso lo
in
sabemos.
our region, that's a
Sin
very
embargo, el
big
2021
challenge, and
se
also
promulgó
for
una
us.
ley, ¿ya? Sobre esta materia
Nevertheless,
con
there
un
was
par
a
de
law
delegados más
promoted
expertos en la
about
materia
this
y recién el
with a few
2023
other
esa
colleagues
ley
that
tiene un
were
reglamento que
experts in
está
the
al día
issue,
de hoy.
and there was a law
Y
that you can see at the
hay
right
que decir,
that was
porque
published.
creo que esto es importante, que
And
el
I have to
proyecto
say,
de
because
ley
I think this is
que se discutió en
important,
el
that the
Parlamento
project
y
of
que
this
llevó a
law that was
esta
discussed
ley
in the parliament
promulgada
and brought us to
data
this
del
law
2002, ¿ya? Son 4 proyectos
is
de ley
from
finalmente que
2002.
se juntaron en esta ley
We were
finalmente. Es
talking
decir,
about four
este proyecto
projects
de ley tuvo
that
una
were
discusión, por supuesto no activa siempre, pero
introduced
tuvo una
into one
discusión a
only
lo
law, and there
largo
was an
de 20 años,
investigation
¿ya?
during 20
Eso
years.
muestra un poco la
So
dificultad que
that
tiene
shows a bit
implementar
the
una estrategia
difficulty
como
that there
esta
is to
y la
implement
necesidad
a
de que
strategy like this
desde
and the need
nuestro
that there
punto de
is
vista
under
y
our point
nuestros
of view
lugares de trabajo
and
podamos
our
promover activamente la
positions
discusión en la materia.
in our workplace to be able to promote
Esto está
discussing the
publicado ya
matter.
y ya lo pueden
This has
encontrar,
been
pero
published.
esto es lo más
You
relevante
can see
probablemente.
it, but this is
La ley se
probably the
diferencia en dos
most
partes,
relevant.
¿ya?
The
Una
law
parte
is
es
divided in two parts. One
las
part
indicaciones sobre
is
etiquetado,
the
¿ya?
indication
Los etiquetados tienen
about
advertencias
the
claras, precisas,
labeling. The
visibles, están
labeling have to be
estandarizados.
clear.
No
They
pueden ser de
have to
otra
be
manera.
precise,
Están realizadas las
visible,
gráficas que
standardized.
tienen
They
los
can't be any
tamaños
other way. The
proporcionales,
graphs and
qué sé
the
yo,
sizes have to be proportional.
los
It's all
mensajes están
standardized.
protegidos
And
en cibernex,
the
no
messages that
conducir
have been chosen
no
are
beber al
three.
conducir,
Don't drive
uso
and don't
para
drink
el
and drive.
embarazo y no beber en menores de 18 años.
Don't
En
drink if
algún momento
you're
se destacó un
underage.
cuarto mensaje que era
And don't
alcohol y
drink
cáncer, pero
if
fue
you are
rechazado en este
pregnant.
camino,
At
¿ya?
one time, there was an alcohol and cancer
No por
message
nosotros,
too,
¿ya?
but it disappeared during the
Esa
way
advertencia
and
drástica,
not
pero
by
además se
us.
debe incluir en
That
todos los gastos
drastic
publicitarios, es decir,
tagging has to be included in all
en audio
marketing. This
radial, en
means in
televisión,
audio
debe aparecer
marketing and
escrito o
television,
el audio
everywhere you have to
del mensaje,
see
¿ya?
that message written
Esto en
or
términos
by
generales, en
audio.
rigor, digamos, hace un
So
par de
This
7 de julio del
started a few
2024.
months
¿Sí?
ago in July of
Lamento no
2024.
traerle ejemplos mejores,
I'm
digamos,
sorry
porque
that
requiere de
I
lugares
cannot
estupendos
give
que
you
tienen el logo, en
clear
fin,
examples.
pero
There are
este
some
es una
places that have the logo, but
de los ejemplos.
this
¿Ya?
is
Son
one of the
vinos
examples
de
of when
Chile
this was
que
taken in
tienen
force in
una
wines in
industria
Chile, for
vitivinícola
example.
importante y
Chile has an
probablemente así
important
estamos avanzando.
wine industry, and this
Pero lo
is
más
how we're doing
importante
it
que
more or
viene
less. But the
todavía
most
tiene
important
que ver
thing
con las regulaciones sobre
here
publicidad,
has to
¿ya?
do with the regulation on
Hay regulación
marketing.
sobre publicidad en eventos
There is
deportivos,
regulation
pero
on
prohíbe,
marketing
¿cierto? Es
in
decir,
sports
no
events,
vamos a tener
which
más publicidad de
are
bebida alcohólica en eventos
banned. For
deportivos.
example, we're not
Y
going to
además
have more
acciones sobre
advertisement of
menores,
alcoholic
publicidades
drinks
sobre menores
in
de edad,
sports
¿ya?
events and
Y esta es la publicidad
advertising
directa,
with
es decir,
juveniles.
que
And
llega a
this is
abusadores, que es muy
direct
buena, como
advertising.
publicidad
So
indirecta.
also
Y lo que
indirect
queremos evitar es esto, ¿no?
advertising.
Que
And what we
son
want
equipos
to
de fútbol de
avoid
Chile,
is if we're talking about the
organizados de
Chile
niños,
foot
¿no?
soccer
Preparados
team
para niños, ¿no? Ahí hay
that
eventos
is
con alcohol,
focused on
fiscales, una
all
cerveza en
kinds
Chile y
of
Torres
public,
Naya
and
es un
children too
vodka
are there. This is a
conocido mundialmente,
Snaya
¿no?
vodka,
Eso no
which
va a ser
is known.
posible
This
en la,
will
en
not
la
be
entrada de esta
possible
indicación o elementos como este, ¿no?
to
Esto
put
cuando la
this
policía le está
indication of
produciendo la
these kinds of
autoridad
elements. This is when the
porque aumentaba su poder
Chile
publicitario,
soccer
¿verdad?
team
La imagen de arriba a la
had
izquierda,
a
por
good
ejemplo, esta
position,
es la
and this is
imagen
the
de
power of
eventos
the
con alcohol de
advertisement.
jóvenes o niños,
On the left
¿ya?
side,
O esto, ¿no?
you
Que
can
es sobre la
see,
cerveza, donde hay unos
for
jóvenes
example, the beer,
bajando
or
de un
you can see
skate
some
por una
juveniles
carretera
going down
en una
with
curva,
a
es decir,
skateboard in a
todas las
curve,
indicaciones de riesgo que uno podría
you know,
imaginar.
all the
Y por
risk
supuesto uno
indications
no
that
puede
you can
saber, o ustedes no
imagine.
pueden saber si
And
esa
of
persona
course,
que va
you
bajando por la
cannot know
curva
if
tiene
that
17,
person that is
16
going down
o
that
20
curve is
años, ¿ya?
16,
Más
17, or
probable que
20
18,
years
¿ya?
old. So this is
Y la publicidad
directed
indirecta
to
es esto,
juveniles.
que creo que es importante
And
decir.
direct
Esta es la misma
advertisement too. I
camiseta
think it's
de un equipo
important
de
to say
fútbol.
this is the same t-shirt that a
La
football
imagen que ven
team
en el
wears.
centro del
The
pecho
image
es
that you see in the
el
center
logotipo, digamos,
of
la
the chest
tipografía de
is
la
the
cerveza que
logo
auspicia esta
of
camiseta. Normalmente
the
sale
beer.
la marca,
Normally
pero
in
aquí
this
salen
shirt you
acciones
see
pro, digamos,
the
prevención,
logo, but
¿ya?
here there are
Toma agua
actions
entre
pro.
tus Pilsen, que es la cerveza,
Drinking, like
acompaña
drink
la
water
Pilsen con
between your
comida, con la
Pilsens,
certeza no tomes si
drink
manejas,
Pilsen
etcétera.
with food, don't drink if you
Los
drive,
mensajes van en
etc.
línea correcto.
So
En todo
these
caso, se
messages are
considera un
correct, but
placement
still this is
indirecto de publicidad de
considered
bebidas,
an
porque de todas maneras
indirect
las personas
placement
son
of
capaces de
alcoholic
identificar que
drinks
la marca
because people
corresponde
can identify that
a
this
ese evento.
brand
O esto, que lo vimos en muchos
has to
países
do with
antes del inicio
alcohol.
de la
And this
pandemia.
that we saw in many
Esta
countries was
compañía,
during the pandemic.
CCU, compañía
This
de
company,
cervecerías
CCU,
unidas, que es
which is a
responsable de
United
la
Beer
gran
Company,
parte de las
is
cervezas más consumidas
responsible
en Chile,
of most of the
preparó y
beers
regaló,
that are
digamos,
most
alcohol
consumed in
gel.
Chile, prepared
Hay otros
alcohol
ejemplos
gel
peores en el mundo,
and
pero
gave them out.
con la
There
marca,
are
digamos, de la
worse
bebida alcohólica
examples
clara
in the
con este
world, but
subtítulo
with
nazi, pero de todas
the
maneras es un
brand of the
placement indirecto de
alcoholic
la publicidad.
beverage. Clearly, this is indirect placement
Bueno,
of
probablemente la publicidad es
advertising.
nuestro mayor logro
Probably the
y tratemos
advertisement,
de
our greatest
resaltar como
success,
impulso
even
en lo
though
que
we've
estamos
had
trabajando.
different challenges like
El
taxes that
advocacy
we're
es súper
working on.
importante
The
de
most
mantenerlo.
important thing
La
that
ley
we
hay
have
una
to
proyecto de
maintain is
ley de
the
20 años,
advocacy. We have
no
a
es que nadie
20-year
quisiera, ¿no?
project of law that you can
Pero
see
nuestro
the
obligación como Comisión
difficulty
de Salud,
that
nuestra
there is, but
responsabilidad
we
de la
spoke
Agencia de
to the
Salud
health
es tener
agency, and our
unos puntos de
responsibility with
vista
the health
claros, digamos,
agency
estrictos,
is to have clear
técnicos,
and
basados en
strict
la
and
evidencia,
technical point
pero
of
además
views,
hacer adaptaciones. Esto es
and
muy importante
also to be
porque
able to adapt.
no
And
todo
this
esto
is
depende
very
de nosotros,
important
¿no? Los
because
tiempos
not
no
all
dependen de
this
nosotros
depends on
siempre.
us.
Hay
The
otras
times
agencias
don't depend
estatales,
always on
dependiendo del
us. There are
gobierno,
other
otros
state
cuerpos
agencies,
públicos,
government,
políticos, digamos,
public
del Parlamento,
agencies,
etcétera.
political
Pero
parliaments,
tenemos que
etc.
estar preparados
But
para
we
cuando
have
estos
to be
espacios de
ready
posibilidad se
for
abran.
when
Y
these
estar
spaces of
preparado no
possibility are
significa tener la
open, being
evidencia,
ready
sino tener
implies not
la
only
precisa
having
evidencia del
bad
país
evidence, but
para lo
having
cual
the
está mi
evidence
diagnóstico,
of the
¿no?
country that
En
we are
exceso de impuestos,
diagnosed for. In the
modelamiento de los
case
impuestos, qué
of
pasaría si
taxes,
aumentamos los
modeling
impuestos,
taxes, what would
cuánto
happen if we
costaría,
increase
cuánto
taxes?
subirían las bebidas
How much would
alcohólicas,
it
cuánto
cost?
sale por
How
la
much
bebida.
would the alcoholic
En
beverage
Latinoamérica
increase?
tenemos datos de
In Latin
elasticidad
America, we don't have
actualmente
elasticity data
económicos,
now,
podemos
currently
calcular eso con los
economically.
precios
We
que
can
hay.
calculate it with the
Y
prices that we
necesitamos
have.
generar alianzas,
And
eso, ¿ah?
oh,
Alianzas para trabajar en esta
also
dirección.
the alliance that we need to be able to
Gracias,
work on this.
doctor
And
Telo.
thank you, Dr. Tello.
No, gracias, doctor
No,
Norambuena.
thank
Ha
you,
sido
Dr.
una excelente
Noran. It's been
presentación,
an excellent
muy
presentation,
completa
very
para
comprehensive
ilustrar el contexto
for
en el cual
the
estas
illustration of the
medidas se han
context in which
adoptado.
these
Creo que
measures have
también
been
es
adopted.
importante
I
reconocer el
also think it's
tiempo que ha
important to
llevado
recognize the
y
time
eso
that it's
motiva
taken, and
probablemente a
that
pensar
brings us
en el
probably
trabajo de
to think
advocacia
in the work of
que se
advocacy
ha hecho
that
detrás de
has
todo
been done
o antes de la
behind
aprobación de la ley.
and before approving that law.
Voy a compartir en todo caso
I'm going to
una
share
pregunta que
also a
nos hace
question that
una
somebody,
participante.
a
Dice,
participant
tiene, o sea, el tema
asked in
a
the
lo
chat.
mejor se puede encuadrar en
maybe this topic can have to do with what is the role of the evidence in this marketing? Why did they adopt, for example, these three ecograms in the labeling? And the question is, are there health indicators, alcohol consumption indicators And in breastfeeding, that refers to the increment of the consumption between women, not necessarily for Chile. They think that the question was done generally. Pablo, 1 minute, so you can reply to this question, and afterwards we'll have the possibility of continuing to elaborate more in
De
detail.
acuerdo, sí, muy rápido. Bueno, la evidencia fue muy
Yes,
importante
of course, and very quickly. The evidence was
para lograr este
fundamental at
acuerdo
the
con el territorio.
beginning in order
Pero
to
cuando
really
hacemos
be able to
alianzas tenemos
collaborate
que
and do
contribuir
this.
para
But
que
when we
estos
have alliances, we need
puntos
to
de
be
vista se transformen,
available
¿no?
for this to be
Porque hay muchos otros
transformed.
actores vinculados.
Because
La
there are many
industria en Chile
other
también es un
actors
actor.
involved.
No
The
puede ser que
industry in Chile,
nosotros
for example, is one of these
creemos que la
actors. We need to
industria
have that
funciona.
idea that
Son
they're,
actores que influyen en la transición
participating
social.
in this
De manera que creo yo que es más
in such a
importante en
way
este
that I
momento, en el momento de la
believe
discusión,
that
que
it's
la
very
evidencia
important, the
misma,
moment of the
es
discussion,
la
that
actuación de esa
evidence
evidencia actual,
itself
no
can
mostrar,
be
no como les mostré ahora
an
las
actor
fotos,
here
pero
and to
informes que
showcase
muestran, digamos,
not
la
like this
publicidad
picture itself,
que
but
de hecho se ha
reports that
visto,
would
la
showcase
realidad
the
histórica y la
advertisement
responsabilidad que de
that
hecho
how
tenemos de
alcohol
todo
is
esto,
actually
la
the
necesidad que de
measure
hecho
that is
tenemos
involved in this, the
de
need that
regularlo
we
constitucionalmente.
have
Y eso fue muy
of
importante en la
regulating it
experiencia
from the law.
para
And that's
llevar
been something very
adelante la
important in my
reforma.
experience for the
Las
creation of
reglas
this
son
law.
los que de manera estándar se han decidido en el mundo. ¿Ah?
To see
De
what
manera
has been
que
decided around the world in
experiencia
such a
internacional
way
fue más importante en este
that
caso
the
para la
regular
discusión
experience is very
acá
important
nacional
for this, for the
de la
national
evidencia.
discussion and the evidence.
Eso. Con la
And
lactancia no
that's
tenemos
it.
muchos
I
datos en
mean,
Chile,
we don't really have
significativos, no
more
dentro
clinical
de la
data
evidencia,
about
pero
that in
tenemos
Chile
estimaciones
for
de
the
una monitoría
prevalence,
que
but we do
podemos
have an
utilizar.
estimation about
Muchísimas gracias.
it
Y
that we could
esto es
use. Thank you very
una
much.
pista a
And this is
nuestra
a really good
próxima
entry
panelista.
point for our
Tengo
next member of
el
the
gusto
panel. It is a
ahora sí
pleasure
de
for me to
presentar a la
present
licenciada Agustina Luque,
Ms. Agustina
que
Luque,
en este caso nos va a
who
ilustrar
in this
cuál ha
case
sido
will
el rol,
be
cuál puede ser
explaining what the
potencialmente
role
el
has
rol
been, what could
de la sociedad
potentially
civil
be
en
the
todo
role
este
for
tipo
civil
de
society in
trabajo,
all
la
of this
discusión de
type
las
of work,
políticas
of adoption
públicas
of public
a
policies
nivel nacional.
at a national
Entonces,
level.
licenciada Luque, la
So,
palabra es
Ms.
suya.
Luque, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. A ver
Thank you very much.
si ven mi pantalla correctamente.
Let me know if you can see my
No en
screen.
modo de presentación.
Not in
Ahora sí.
presentation mode.
Ok,
Okay, now
bueno,
we
muchas
can.
gracias
Great.
a
Well,
la
thank you
OPS y a
very
la
much
OPS
to
por la
the
invitación a este
World Health
webinar y
Organization
a
and
este
the
panel.
OPS for
Mi
the
nombre es
invitation to this
Agustina Luque
webinar
y
and
estoy
this
en
panel.
representación
My
de
name
la
is
Coalición
Agustina
América
Lupe and I
Saludable,
represent the
CLAS.
América Saludable Coalition, CLAS.
CLAS es una alianza de
CLAS
individuos y de
is an
organizaciones no
alliance of
gubernamentales que
individuals and
trabajan en prevención
NGOs
y
who work
control de
for the
enfermedades
prevention and
transmisibles en
control
América
of
Latina.
non-transmissible
Fue
diseases in
fundada en
Latin America.
2011
It was founded in
con miras a la primera reunión de
2011,
alto nivel sobre
and
enfermedades
it
no
was the
transmisibles
first
de Latin
high-level
America.
meeting about
Un dato curioso, ahora que
non-transmissible
estamos próximos
diseases
al
in Latin
cuarto
America,
reunión
which
de
is
alto
quite curious
nivel
because we're now
sobre
getting
enfermedades
close
no
to the
transmisibles.
fourth meeting about these
Los miembros
non-transmissible
de CLAS
diseases.
incluyen organizaciones de salud,
The
de
members of class
consumidores,
include for
academia, personas
health,
con experiencia en
consumers,
vivir estas
academia,
situaciones que
people
viven
with
con
lived
enfermedades no
experience, people
transmisibles
with lived with
y
this type of
cuidadores,
diseases,
y
as well as their
jóvenes detrás de la Alianza
caregivers,
Juvenil.
and
La
the
Alianza
youth
Juvenil
behind the Youth
es
Alliance, or Alianza
justamente un grupo de
Juvenil, who are
jóvenes de
precisely a
CLAS.
group of youth from class
También es parte del Consejo
who
Juvenil
are
de la
now part
OMS,
of the Youth
con lo
Council
cual es una
of the
gran
World Health
oportunidad y creo
Organization, which proves a
que van a
great
tener un rol también
opportunity.
muy
And I
importante
believe that they're
en
going
este
to play an
trabajo
essential role
de
for
sociedad
this
civil para contribuir al
civil
avance de
society
estas
work for
políticas públicas
contributing in the
efectivas.
advancement of these
Desde
effective
sociedad
public
civil ya
policies.
hace
So, from
varios
civil
años
societies, for
venimos
many, many
preocupados por la
years now, we've been
contaminación del alcohol
concerned
que la
about the
consume
damages
nuestro
caused by
entorno, como ya
alcohol
se
for
dijo
those who
antes.
consume it and their
De hecho, es
environment.
una
As it's
prioridad
been said
dentro de la
before, it's
Agenda
actually a
Regional
priority
2030 que
within the
tenemos en
2030
CLAS.
agenda that we have in class,
La Agenda Regional es
which
un
is, the
documento
regional
elaborado por
agenda is a
consenso
document
con nuestros
created by
miembros y
consensus with
aliados
our
y que
members
guía
and
un poco
alliance
el
and
trabajo
allies
como
who
coalición hacia
which
el
help
2030 y el
guide the
alcoholismo es
work as
una
a
prioridad
coalition
en nuestra agenda
2030, and the
regional.
alcohol is one of our regional
Y como
priorities
decía,
for
hace
our
varios años que
agenda.
venimos reuniéndonos con
As
nuestros
I've said, for
miembros y con
many years,
aliados
we've been
viendo
meeting
cómo
with our
podemos
members and different
avanzar con
allies to
nuestra
see how
agenda
we
con
can move
nuestros
forward,
países.
what the situation
Y
in each of the countries
recientemente
is.
algunos
And
países han
very
recibido
recently, some
apoyo para
countries have
ayudar
been
a
receiving
trabajar
support to start working
sobre alcohol y más
on alcohol,
recientemente
and even more
CLAS ha recibido el
recently,
apoyo de
class has
Forud y
received the
NURAD
support
para
of Forut
trabajar
in
en la
Arad in
región
order to
sobre
work
alcohol. Y gracias a este
on the
apoyo,
region
hace 2 semanas, ahora en
for support supporting this. Now, On November, we met in Bogota, Colombia, with reference to the civil society in order to talk about how we can move forward. And as a result of 2 days of discussion, of exchange, and of a lot of learning, we created the Latin American Alliance of Alcohol Action, or ALASA. We can see a picture from the day this alliance was created, which I consider to be a very important first step, and it comes at a very right time to promote policies that will, at the end of the day, protect the health of our population. Some obstacle challenges, or if you wish, negative aspects, as well as different opportunities or positive aspects that we see, is on the first place, unfortunately, this is something that's not on the political agenda of many countries of our region. In some countries it is, and we celebrate that, but not the reality in most of the countries of the region. And we know that without the correct implementation of the policies, then the consumption will probably stay on the rise, and as a consequence, also the damages caused by the consumption. Another obstacle would be the industry's interference, that we know that it is an obstacle for this type of diseases, which is no exception with alcohol. And there's very few awareness about the damages caused by alcohol and the dangers it represents. And I think this is an area of opportunity to work on. And even though there is evidence about the damages of alcohol, I think there is some disconnection between the perception and the awareness between the legislators and the public in general. So it's a challenge that's an opportunity to continue working to increase this awareness. And as an opportunity or positive aspects, I believe that it's a regional and international scenario which is positive. The World Health Organization, the OPS, it gives spaces such as this when it's positive, that in a world strategy there is a safer action plan. These are extremely positive tools. We know we we've met priority areas that we can work and that we can continue and start working with this, and that's something positive. There's greater support in the region, as we've mentioned. Some countries have received support. CLAS has received support to work on the region, and we have support from other organizations in different ways to continue moving forward. And there is a civil organization that I believe to be real, for the civil society in Latin America has a lot of experience working on this for different degrees, tobacco control, and it's a civil society that is becoming increasingly more specialized in alcohol. And I believe that the creation of this Latin American Action Society, ALASA, is a sample of this organized civil society who are willing to work in a collaborative fashion and the different efforts to continue pushing forward in these effective public policies. Some of the priorities or next steps, of course, would be the strengthening of the regional alliance. I'm going to do this a little bit fast so that we can be respectful of time. It's also contributing to the development of national coalition, as well as contributing to the development of different abilities and capabilities, particularly in countries where there's no systematic action against alcohol, supporting incidence action for the change of policies within the region, as well as supporting the actions that are taken at a national level, depending on the context and the needs in each of the countries, and developing a communication strategy about each of these. So it would be the lack of awareness about the damages and harm alcohol presents. So it becomes very important to have the implementation that it needs, that needs separate strategies. So we're talking about a regional communication strategy, and then it is necessary to first talk about the organizations who are working in each of these countries to see at a regional level which one works for each of these different contexts. So they need different strategies, they need different approaches, and it's needed, therefore, to improve the communication. And just to finish up, I would like to repeat once again that I believe the creation of this Action Alliance in Latin America against alcohol, it's a very timely step from the region. We understand that no country is isolated. The strategies from the industry are very often transnational, and we know and understand that there's a lot to learn from each other within the region. So I believe that this is simply the simple that there's a committed civil society to the health of our population, and that they are willing to work in a collaborative fashion from the disposition of class and the alliance to continue working in a collaborative fashion to move forward with these public policies that may be so that they may be effective. Thank you. Thank you so much, Miss Luque. And I would like to profit, Agustina, to just turn to one of the questions that has been asked by the participants, which is what are the main barriers in the Americas for the implementation of policies targeting cultural change? This is quite difficult, but I understand that as a civil society, you probably also work on the root cause of these problems related to the normalization of alcohol, which is what we've been discussing so much. Thank you so much, Juan. Well, the barriers in general are kind of like the ones that I've already mentioned, the geopolitical, the interference of the industry, and the interference of this industry that very often tries to normalize alcohol consumption. And there's a lot of work and challenge of denormalizing the consumption of alcohol. As well as I believe it's very important from a civil society perspective is what we're looking for, is being able to reach more communities and communities, rural communities, indigenous communities, helping them understand and see what the issues in those communities are, what they're facing, so that we can analyze this problematic according to the context and the needs from each of these communities. So what I believe is that there's also a barrier there when I talk about these communities in evidence, in data. Some of the things that we've been talking about in this meeting as such is that one of the conversation here is related to what are the damages, what happens, what is the problematic about this type of local communities. So it's a barrier, it's a gap, but at least it's an area of opportunity that as a civil society we can explore to see how we can continue moving forward. Thank you so much, Agustina, and thank you so much for balancing also the gender here that weren't we wouldn't have been able to accomplish it in the agenda without you. So with this, now we will be moving forward to Colombia's case, and Alejandro Marin has a lot of experience also from different initiatives that have been about which ones have been the recent policies that Colombia has adopted in order to move forward and decrease the alcohol consumption, as well as the implementation of these safer strategies. So, Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us, even though it was very last minute, but I know that you are more than ready to answer all of the questions. Please go ahead. Thank you, Juan, and thank you so much. It's a real pleasure, and I would like to greet everyone who, throughout all of Latin America, are connected to this webinar. I would like to thank the WHO, the OPS, that are helping us place prevention of the damages caused by alcohol in a priority space, which I believe is one of the challenges we're facing. And regarding your question, Juan, I would like to mention two main aspects. One is united to what you've already mentioned, about the main challenges, because that's really going to help us connect with what improvements have we had at a national level in Colombia. And I believe that the main challenge, which is what Agustina was mentioning in the answer she provided us, is how can we, not only from a civil society perspective, but from government actors, from academic actors, do an entire process at a social level that will allow the denormalization of the use of alcohol as an everyday kind of thing. I think this is also a challenge regarding public policies, because sometimes when we build public policies in many different topics, we don't take into consideration what is it that people is thinking about, how is it that they are naming all of the different areas of interest. And with alcohol, it's very important to have this clarity in order to facilitate and ensure that all of these policies, such as, for example, the SAFER and DAC, didn't socialize, and let's say also Pablo from Chile's experience was telling us, and allow them to have a real impact with the population. And it was really part of all of us who were here. We can see it in all of our countries, how there's a way in which we can name alcohol, which is very close to people, which apparently might be close to them, but it's not for the entire population, which is also something that more than likely, when we look at the webinar or different reflection spaces that are more targeting, like advertisement, will give the opportunity to discuss how can we focus to some of the things that relate to the use of alcohol. But we usually perceive this in order to say that it's close, and we perceive it as something very, very close to us. And secondly, and joined to this, is that we're not really understanding what is the dimension of these damages and harm. And I think that's the second point, because it's not only from communitary actors, but it's from the decision makers themselves, for us to be able to fully understand the dimension of the harm and damages caused by alcohol as something that goes way beyond the effect it might have on our health. Because when we talk about this topic and how it damages us, it's simply focusing on how it hurts your health, the diseases that might happen when they generate a dependency to alcohol. But there is a lack of knowledge, of awareness, of ignorance about great part of the damages that occur at a social and economic level, that occur at a violence level, that happened at a multiple different diseases, both physical and not only those related to the liver, as for example in Colombia, that we simply associate liver failure to alcohol consumption, but there are different types of diseases that are related, and we have enough evidence around the world of how alcohol is a direct cause to these types of cancer. So I think a big part of this work regarding these challenges would also be in putting on the table all of this discussion, as we say in Colombia, in the context of each of these people, so that we can understand what these need, that it needs an essential work here. And the third point that we would have here in this part to connect it to what we are moving forward with in Colombia is also something that happens in many different places in the world, which is that we have several different regulations around the world, that alcohol is framed in many different aspects that SAFER is proposing ever since 2018. However, we have, and it's something that we see in Colombia as an area of opportunity, a lot of field of action in order to strengthen those policies, that they are written, that they are developing, and when we see the fewer advancements is related to advertisement, but in some others, there are several other points to take into consideration, and we need to really go in depth so that all of those policies and actions can really protect the population from alcohol as one of the main targets that we were talking about. So here we see the challenge of what we've been doing in Colombia for in recent years. We could say that for perhaps ever since 2016, 2017, we started to have a much more systematic approach of creating and constructing public policies around alcohol, with different proposals of national instruments for policies with a frame of what would be a world strategy. But in the last 2 years, after the Risea Alcohol Initiative, which is a different initiative from organizations led by the WHO and Vital Strategies, we could have a series of resources that will allow us to move forward in strengthening the policies of action in Colombia, focusing on taxes. But we are seeing how the reflection, even though it comes in because of taxes, of how we can strengthen the fiscal policies allows us to have a collective reflection and how we can strengthen the rest of the effects of policies in Colombia. We could say that this is also in compliance with a clear principle that SAFER has, which is the interconnectivity that different actions might have as you strengthen one, and it may require an analysis that will allow, specifically in the national context, how to continue strengthening these three policies. And lastly, on these regards, I think that Colombia's experience has been very enriching for those who have been working for many, many different years in topics related to policies of alcohol, because it has allowed to have a synergic exercise between organizations of civil society, between organizations that are part of academic research groups in the country, as well as with an initial company, not only from the Pan American Health Organization, but also from different national authorities, such as the Ministry of Health, that has incorporated and moving from improvements in recent years by generating greater understanding on the importance that this this might have. So there are three key aspects that have been worked on in the country within this framework. One, being able to identify actors that are essential and strategic for the development and strengthening of public policies that in perhaps recent years we didn't have in the analysis context, that would allow us to have a much vaster area of conversation of what the damages caused by alcohol are and what are the different actions of articulated policies that we need to take in order to reduce the damages caused by alcohol, which is a little bit kind of like the fundamental principle. So now we have different exercises that have allowed us to do that identification and to have conversations that don't always end up being quite as easy because of the way in which we find alcohol and the narrative we have of alcohol in the country, but that have allowed us to start sitting down with different actors at a government level, with different civil society actors, to have conversations between all of us and seeing what things can be developed about this. The second pillar of work we have had, it's something also that Agustina and Paulo have mentioned, which is the importance of generating evidence in context, and not only evidence in context, but also being able to have a construction of indicators for alcohol consumption policies that will give us an idea of the prevalence as the only key indicator, which is something important in the country, in order to understand that there are other indicators, such as the per capita consumption, that are much more sensitive to what we might do as a policy, and that will give us a much better understanding of what we're doing and what we still need to do. And that's been something very important regarding the work that comes from the academia that has been developed in order to generate this information from the international context, analyzing the Colombian context, allow them to make better decisions about at a public policy. And lastly, the third pillar of the work that we've been developing, and it would be kind of like starting to talk about the challenges, would be also starting to have an influence in the social norm about the alcohol that we have established in Colombia, which is something that we could have a different webinar talking only about the social norm, but talking about this through a work in social network, a communicative work about how we can start to generate different understanding of the place of alcohol, especially focused on how this affects populations, such as, for example, girls and boys, that since they don't necessarily use alcohol as much as a grown person, it would appear that they don't have direct damages of alcohol. However, they're one of the main vulnerable priority populations, and one of the entry points and important things here has been to start identifying those speeches and correlations that will allow us to mobilize not only public policy of the country, but also the decision makers, in order for them to support and accompany those alcohol policies from a very different comprehension of what the place for alcohol is, which is, I believe, something that has allowed us to have a complementary exercise that very clearly is still in a starting stage, that there's still a lot of different challenges to be faced, but that they will start to give us the security of this synergic work with all of these organizations that I've mentioned, with quality information that will allow us at the medium and long term to strengthen public policies that SAFER is stating. And I think that would be the end of my first intervention. Thank you, Alejandro. It's very interesting that you've once again called us to the main goal, which is, decreasing the damage caused by alcohol consumption in boys, teenagers, but also grown-ups, families, and society in general. There are a lot of questions that are extremely interesting. I would like to thank the participants from, having giving us the opportunity, for having wanting to share all of this, because many of these topics are topics that we're going to be developing in this beginning webinar. A lot of these topics we will be going in depth in the upcoming months, and you'll have the possibility of going back, of developing with more time each of these 5 areas. I think we've added another one. There's some topics that are transversal. For example, alcohol consumption and gender, the alcohol consumption in teenage years, the benefits of an agenda that includes alcohol, but also other elements such as that may be more advanced, such as, for example, it could be tobacco, and it's something that has been expressed by some of our colleagues who participated on the webinar. Or, for example, what are the implications that the promotion of drinks with a low degree of alcohol or that are alcohol free as they are represented in some advertisements. So we will have the possibility of analyzing this in depth. We will be taking note of all of your questions as well, and we would like to invite each and every single one of you to continue connecting with us from January on to the next 5 webinars, which we will be developing. So I'm just gonna give 2 key messages. We won't have time with the members of our panel to go in depth, but we will be inviting them again, most likely. It's very interesting, the case of Chile and marketing Costa Rica. I see that there are different participants who are joining us from Costa Rica who are probably very interested in this because it's another country that has moved forward a lot in marketing. And these are lessons that we can start to create as a practice community, or countries that in a way can illustrate the different challenges that are advancing or moving forward when these proposals are advanced. I like it, and I'm going to take this from your messages, Alejandro. The synergies topic, which I believe was really well illustrated in the case of the synergies from civil society and the rest of the governments and other actors, that was really well illustrated by Agustina Luque. I think we need to continue exploiting, meaning taking advantage of the synergies. And the second synergy that you mentioned, Alejandro, and with this I'm going to finish up, would be the fact that some countries moved forward, had bigger progress in some areas of the 5 areas that we've mentioned, which are the priority areas of focus for the WHO. It doesn't mean that the other areas are left aside. These are packages that are integrated, that they work with synergy. And of course, when we move one of these interventions that are preventive, we also move, or they call to see different areas. So if we're talking about alcohol availability, we then necessarily need to talk about the affordability. If we talk about affordability, then we also need to think about brief interventions, etc., etc. Somebody on the chat also wrote down about the different traffic accidents. We will have a webinar completely dedicated to that. So with this, I do apologize that we went behind on our agenda. Leonardo, I'll give you the floor back. Don't worry, Juan, and thank you so much, and Alejandro, Agustina, and Pablo for the clarity of their thoughts. I believe that all of these reflections teach us or provide us some light on how we can move forward in the implementation of SAFER. As we move forward, the panel, and you'll probably, just like you were doing in the questions today, we were reflecting on how each of these questions and comments are clearly giving us enough to discuss for a whole webinar, because these are all key points and topics. But I think it's very important with regards to what Dak was saying on SAFER's presentation. Obviously, every country will move forward in a strategic way, which is probably very complicated, moving forward with the implementation of all 5 initiatives, with these 5 interventions, and this will strategically need to be involved. Like, what are the starting points? There's some countries that will probably start because of the availability, or they will work more on the market.
Creo que es muy importante también revisar en
I think it's
relación
very
a
important
que
also to check
es
in
fundamental,
relation to
digamos,
the
dentro de
fact that it's
esos retos,
fundamental, the
poder
fact
trabajar
that
en la
those challenges we need
desnormalización
to
del uso de
work
bebidas alcohólicas.
with the
Fue
lack of
mencionado
normalization of
ampliamente por
alcoholic
Agustina,
beverages.
lo
This was
menciona también
mentioned by
Alejandro también
Agustina,
dentro de las
also
reflexiones de Paulo.
Alejandro inside
Y
the
es
reflections of
importante que
Paulo.
entre los
And it is
países
important that amongst
trabajen esa
countries,
desnormalización.
we
Y creo
work
que
with
podemos
that
seguramente seguir esa
taking away the
sugerencia que hablaba Agustina
normalization. And I think
en
we can talk
relación, por
about those
ejemplo,
suggestions that
a las
Agustina was
mismas,
talking about
a promoviendo esa conciencia en
when we
relación a
talk
los daños
about
del alcohol.
promoting that consciousness
Es
on the harms
importante
of alcohol.
destacar,
It is
además,
important
que
to
para poder
also
evaluar el impacto que tienen
talk
estas
about the fact
iniciativas,
that to
es
be able to
fundamental
evaluate the
fortalecer los
impact of these
sistemas de
initiatives, that
monitoreo,
it is
el
fundamental
sistema
to strengthen
interior,
the
de
monitoring and
señalización al alcohol.
assessment systems of alcohol.
Mencionaba Alejandro, y es que las medidas no
Alexandra was
solamente
mentioning that
efectivamente
the
van a emitir,
measures not
sino
only
que se
have
pueda
to
medir, por
continue,
ejemplo,
but we have
el
to be
consumo de
able
alcohol
to
per cápita
measure, for
y también
example,
poder
the
evaluar
consumption of
seguramente el
alcohol
impacto
per
que tienen las
capita, and also
iniciativas sobre
evaluate
la
the
salud
impact of
y
the
sobre tal
initiatives
como
on
sobre
health
el uso de bebidas
and on the
alcohólicas.
use of
Es
alcoholic
también un
beverages.
reto seguir cambiando
It's
esas normas
also a
sociales y
challenge to continue
claramente es un
changing that
reto
social
poder
norm.
trabajar
And
en
clearly, it
implementaciones de
is a
iniciativas costo
challenge to work
efectivas
in
para la prevención
cost-effective
del uso de alcohol.
implementations
Pero creo
to
que es una
prevent
invitación,
alcohol use.
uno, para
But
que
I think it's
conozcamos la
an
iniciativa.
invitation, one,
Queremos
to
invitarles
know
a que
the
ustedes la
Safer
conozcan. Ahorita les
Initiative.
vamos a colocar en el chat el
We
enlace en
want
donde
to
ustedes
put
pueden
the link in
encontrar
the chat
el
now
material,
because we
la
would like to invite you
información
to
y
read the material, get
adicionalmente
to know the
empezar a promoverla,
information,
empezar a
and
hablar de ella.
additionally start
Y
promoting it and
claramente
start talking about
destacar
it. And
algo con lo
clearly,
que Renato Oliveira
I want to tell
inició el
you
día de hoy. No existe
the
ningún
importance and
consumo
highlight something that
seguro de
Renato
alcohol.
Oliveira spoke
Todo
about today. There
consumo
is no
puede conllevar
safe
algún tipo
consumption
de
of
riesgo.
alcohol. All
Y
consumption
de
of
hecho, cuando
alcohol can
hablamos
bring
de
you to some kind of
safer,
risk. And when we talk
hablamos de
about
una
the safer
iniciativa
strategy,
que
we
está
talk about an
orientada a
initiative
prevenir
that is
los daños del
orientated to
alcohol.
prevent the damages of
Queremos
alcohol.
agradecerles
We
a
want
cada
to
uno y a
thank
cada
each
uno
and
de
every one of
ustedes,
you,
a todas las personas que estuvieron
each of you
participando
and
en este
everybody who has
webinario.
been
Y queremos
participating in
invitarlos
this
seguramente a
webinar. And we want to
en
invite you
2025
that in
participen en otros
2025
espacios
to
orientados a
participate in
seguir
other spaces
fortaleciendo la
oriented
prevención
to
de los daños
continue
del alcohol.
strengthening the
Les
prevention
agradezco y
of the
espero que
harms of
tengan un
alcohol.
día
I
maravilloso.
appreciate you and I hope you have an amazing day.